old man sits quietly, the Quran open before him. Outside his home, angry voices rise. He chooses peace, not battle. He chooses faith over fear. But his sacrifice will tear the Ummah apart forever. This is the story of Uthman ibn Affan, his rise, his sacrifice, and the tragedy that changed the Muslim world forever. If you're here, we beg you for the sake of Allah to help us grow this channel by subscribing and share this story to honor the sacrifices of our early heroes and awaken hearts. The sound of angry voices grew louder outside the modest home in Medina. Inside, an elderly man with a flowing white beard sat peacefully. His fingers tracing the verses of the Quran spread before him. This was Uthman ibn Affan, the third Caliph of Islam, a man who had once been among the wealthiest merchants of Mecca, but who now faced death at the hands of those who claimed to be believers. For 40 days, rebels had besieged his house, cutting him off from water, preventing him from attending prayers at the mosque, and hurling accusations that grew more venomous with each passing day. Yet Uthman refused to raise arms against them, saying, "I will not be the first successor of Muhammad to shed the blood of the Muslim community." The assassination of Uthman ibn Affan was not merely the murder of a political leader. It was a pivotal moment that forever altered the course of Islamic history. This single act of violence triggered the first major civil strife in the Muslim community. A division so profound that its reverberations continue to shape the Islamic world nearly 14 centuries later. This is the story of Uthman ibn Affan, his rise to leadership, his achievements, the conspiracy that formed against him, his tragic end, and the irreparable fracture that followed. It is a tale of power and piety, of jealousy and justice, of unity shattered and a community divided. In the bustling city of Mecca, nearly 6 centuries after the birth of Christ, a child was born into the prestigious Umayyad clan of the Quraysh tribe. His name was Uthman ibn Affan, born into privilege and wealth. None could have predicted that this son of merchants would one day lead the rapidly expanding Islamic empire, nor that his death would create a schism that would forever alter the course of Islamic history. Uthman's early life was one of comfort and status. The Umayyads were among the most influential families in Mecca, controlling much of the city's trade and commerce. As a young man, Uthman followed in his family's footsteps, becoming a successful merchant in his own right. Unlike many of his contemporaries, historical accounts tell us that Uthman never prostrated to idols even in the pre-Islamic period of ignorance. He abstained from alcohol and was known for his modesty and restraint. The course of Uthman's life changed forever when, at the age of 34, he heard about the new message being preached by Muhammad ibn Abdullah. It was Abu Bakr, a respected merchant and close friend, who first told Uthman about Islam. Without hesitation, he embraced the new faith, becoming one of the earliest converts to Islam. The fourth man to accept the religion after Ali ibn Abi Talib, Zayd ibn Haritha, and Abu Bakr himself. His conversion was no small matter. The Umayyad clan was among the staunchest opponents of the new religion. By accepting Islam, Uthman risked alienation from his family and tribe. Yet he stood firm in his conviction, demonstrating from the very beginning the moral courage that would characterize his life as a Muslim. Soon, a deeper bond would form between Uthman and the Prophet. When Uthman married Ruqayyah, one of Muhammad's beloved daughters, when the persecution of Muslims in Mecca intensified, Uthman and Ruqayyah were among the first to make the difficult journey to Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, seeking refuge under the protection of the Christian Negus. Tragedy struck when Ruqayyah fell ill during the Battle of Badr. Uthman, torn between joining the Muslim army and caring for his wife, was instructed by the Prophet to remain at her side. Ruqayyah passed away on the very day news arrived of the Muslims' victory at Badr. In a remarkable testament to the bond between Uthman and the Prophet, Muhammad later offered his second daughter, Kulthum, in marriage to the widowed Uthman. This unprecedented honor, being married to two daughters of a prophet, though not simultaneously, earned Uthman the affectionate title Dun Nurayn, meaning possessor of two lights. Throughout the Prophet's lifetime, Uthman remained one of his closest companions and advisors. He participated in nearly every major campaign except Badr, contributed generously to the cause of Islam, and was known for his deep knowledge of the Quran. When the Prophet Muhammad passed away in 632 CE, Abu Bakr became the first caliph, followed by Umar ibn al-Khattab as the second caliph. When Umar was fatally stabbed by a Persian slave in 644 CE, he appointed a six-man council to choose his successor. After deliberation, the council selected Uthman, who was then in his late 60s or early 70s. When Uthman ibn Affan ascended to the caliphate in 644 CE, he inherited an empire in the midst of rapid expansion and transformation. The humble community that had begun in Medina just 2 decades earlier had grown into a formidable state stretching across vast territories. The day of his appointment, Uthman stood before the people of Medina, his voice steady and resolute. "I will follow in the footsteps of those who came before me, adhering to the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger. In matters where there is no clear precedent, I will consult with you, for governance is a trust, and I am merely its custodian." Perhaps Uthman's most enduring achievement came early in his caliphate. Concerned about growing variations in how the Quran was being recited across the expanding Islamic territories, he commissioned a committee headed by Zayd ibn Thabit to compile an official, standardized version of the holy text. Once completed, copies of this standardized Quran were sent to major cities throughout the Islamic world, with instructions that all other versions be destroyed to prevent confusion and discord. The Quran we read today, nearly 14 centuries later, is Uthman's Quran, a testament to his foresight and commitment to Islamic unity. Under Uthman's leadership, the territorial expansion of the Islamic State continued apace. Muslim armies pushed further into Persia, reaching as far as Khorasan in the east. In the west, they consolidated control over North Africa. Cyprus fell to the Muslims in 649 CE, marking the first significant naval victory for the Islamic forces. Indeed, it was Uthman who established the first Muslim naval fleet, recognizing the strategic importance of maritime power. These military successes brought enormous wealth flowing into the coffers of the Islamic State. Uthman directed these resources toward public works and infrastructure development. Roads were improved, wells were dug, and irrigation systems were expanded. In Medina itself, he enlarged the Prophet's mosque to accommodate the growing number of worshippers. Uthman's personal conduct as caliph reflected his deep piety and humility. Despite having access to the vast resources of the state, he lived modestly and continued to support the poor and needy from his personal wealth. His devotion to the Quran remained a defining feature of his life. Even as caliph, with all the demands of governance pressing upon him, Uthman would spend hours each day in recitation and contemplation of the holy text. The first half of Uthman's 12-year caliphate thus represented a high point in early Islamic history. The empire was expanding, the economy was thriving, and the religious foundations of the community were being strengthened. From Egypt to Persia, Muslims and non-Muslims alike benefited from the stability and prosperity of this period. As the Islamic Empire continued to expand under Uthman's leadership, the very success of this expansion began to sow the seeds of discord that would eventually lead to tragedy. The second half of Uthman's 12-year caliphate witnessed a gradual shift in the political landscape. As new challenges emerged that would test the elderly caliph's leadership, it was in his approach to administrative challenges that Uthman made decisions that would later be used against him. Unlike Umar, who had been careful to appoint governors from various tribal backgrounds, Uthman increasingly relied on members of his own Umayyad clan for key positions. His cousin Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan governed Syria, Another relative, Abdullah ibn Saad, governed Egypt, and other family members received important appointments throughout the empire. Uthman's defenders point out that he selected these men for their competence and loyalty, not merely their family connections. Indeed, many of his appointees proved to be capable administrators who maintained stability in their regions. Yet the perception of nepotism grew, particularly among those who had been displaced from positions of authority. Changes in fiscal policy also contributed to growing discontent. Under Umar, the distribution of wealth from conquests had followed strict guidelines, with careful accounting and equitable sharing among the Muslims. Uthman adopted a more flexible approach, allowing governors greater discretion in managing provincial finances. While this decentralization made practical sense given the empire's size, it also created opportunities for abuse and led to perceptions of favoritism. The demographic changes within the Islamic community further complicated matters. The rapid expansion had brought millions of new converts into the fold, many of whom had not experienced the formative years of Islam under the Prophet's guidance. Social tensions simmered beneath the surface, creating fertile ground for dissent. Into this increasingly complex environment stepped a mysterious figure, whose role in the events that followed remains controversial to this day. Abdullah ibn Saba, reportedly a converted Jew from Yemen, began traveling throughout the Islamic territories, spreading subversive ideas. According to traditional accounts, Ibn Saba cleverly exploited existing grievances, whispering criticisms of Uthman's policies and suggesting that the Caliph had deviated from the path established by the Prophet. The complaints against Uthman took various forms. Some criticized his appointments, particularly his reliance on Umayyad relatives. Others questioned his management of the public treasury, suggesting that he favored certain groups over others. Still others raised religious objections, claiming that he had introduced innovations into Islamic practice. Uthman, now in his 80s, responded to these criticisms with patience and forbearance. When complaints reached him, he would invite the critics to Medina to present their grievances directly. In public assemblies, he would address each accusation, explaining the reasoning behind his decisions and reminding the community of the Islamic principles of unity and respect for authority. By the 11th year of his caliphate, the seeds of discontent had grown into a serious threat to stability. What had begun as legitimate policy disagreements had evolved into a movement seeking to remove the Caliph from power, a dangerous precedent in a community that valued unity and respected authority. In the year 35 after the Hijrah, 656 CE, the simmering tensions finally boiled over. The focal point of opposition emerged in Egypt, where discontent with the governor Abdullah ibn Saad, Uthman's foster brother, had been growing for years. A group of several hundred Egyptians, led by Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, the son of the first caliph, and Muhammad ibn Abi Hudayfa, decided to take their grievances directly to Medina. They were joined by similar contingents from Kufa and Basra, creating a formidable force of nearly 1,000 disgruntled Muslims converging on the capital. When the rebels arrived outside Medina, they sent representatives to present their demands. The list of complaints was long and varied. Accusations of nepotism in appointments, mismanagement of the treasury, innovations in religious practice, and personal indulgences unbecoming of a caliph. They demanded that Uthman either address these issues immediately or step down from the caliphate. Uthman received their representatives in the Prophet's mosque, the symbolic heart of the Islamic community. With remarkable patience for a man of his advanced age, he listened to each complaint and then responded point by point. He explained the reasoning behind his appointments, defended his management of public funds, and clarified that his religious practices followed the sunnah of the Prophet. Where valid criticisms were raised, he acknowledged them and promised to make amends. The calm dignity of Uthman's response, combined with the intervention of respected companions like Ali ibn Abi Talib, who urged moderation, temporarily diffused the crisis. Many of the rebels, impressed by the caliph's willingness to listen and his reasonable explanations, agreed to return to their provinces. This relief, however, proved short-lived. As the Egyptian contingent was departing, they intercepted a messenger carrying a letter allegedly from Uthman to the governor of Egypt. The letter, bearing what appeared to be the caliph's seal, ordered the governor to execute the leaders of the rebellion upon their return. Furious at this apparent treachery, the Egyptians immediately turned back toward Medina, joined once again by rebels from Kufa and Basra, who had not yet dispersed. When confronted with the letter, Uthman was genuinely shocked. "By Allah," he swore, "I did not write this letter, nor did I order it to be written." He suggested that the letter was a forgery, possibly created by someone in his own administration, seeking to provoke conflict. Some historians point to Marwan ibn al-Hakam, Uthman's cousin and secretary, as the possible author, though this remains speculative. Whether the letter was genuine or forged remains one of the great mysteries of this pivotal moment in Islamic history. What is clear is that the rebels no longer trusted Uthman's word. The fragile peace shattered, and the returning rebels now approached Medina not with grievances to be addressed, but with a determination to remove Uthman from power. The situation deteriorated rapidly. The rebels established camps around Medina and began to restrict movement in and out of the city. They allowed people to attend Friday prayers, but prevented Uthman himself from leading the congregation. An unprecedented humiliation for the Caliph of Islam. Ali, placed in an impossible position, tried to mediate between Uthman and the rebels. While he had his own reservations about some of Uthman's policies, he was horrified by the rebels' actions and the prospect of violence against the legitimate caliph. As the siege entered its fourth week, rumors began to circulate that forces loyal to Uthman were gathering in Syria under Muawiyah's leadership and preparing to march on Medina. Whether these rumors were true or merely the product of anxious speculation, they added urgency to the rebels' calculations. If they were to act decisively against Uthman, they would need to do so before reinforcements could arrive. On the 17th of June, 656 CE, corresponding to the 18th of Dhul Hijjah in the Islamic calendar, the gathering storm finally broke. After 40 days of siege, the rebels' patience had run out. Rumors of approaching relief forces from Syria had reached their ears, and they knew that if Muawiyah's troops arrived, their opportunity would be lost. The morning began like the many tense days that had preceded it. Uthman, now denied access to the mosque, performed his dawn prayers in the courtyard of his home. As he completed his recitation, he turned to his wife Naila and said quietly, "I saw the Prophet in my dream last night. He said to me, 'You will break your fast with us tomorrow.'" Naila, understanding the implication, wept silently. Outside the house, the rebels had gathered in greater numbers than usual. The initial plan was to force entry through the main door, but they found it guarded by a small group of loyal defenders, including Hassan and Hussein, the grandsons of the Prophet, whom Ali had sent to protect the Caliph. Unwilling to directly confront these respected young men, the rebels changed tactics. A group of them moved to the rear of Uthman's property, where it adjoined the house of a man from the Ansar named Abu Hazm. They scaled the wall between the properties and dropped down into Uthman's courtyard, bypassing the defenders at the front entrance. Inside, Uthman was sitting with the Quran open before him, deeply engaged in recitation. The sound of intruders caused him to look up, but he showed no fear. Years earlier, the Prophet Muhammad had predicted that Uthman would face a great test and had advised him, "If the hypocrites try to force you to remove the shirt with which Allah has clothed you, the caliphate, do not remove it." Uthman had remembered these words throughout the siege, drawing strength from the knowledge that his trial had been foretold. The first rebel to reach Uthman was Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, who grabbed the elderly caliph's beard and yanked it roughly. "May Allah disgrace you, Nathal," he shouted, using a derogatory nickname that compared Uthman to a long-bearded Jew. Uthman looked at him calmly and said, "I am not Nathal. I am Uthman ibn Affan, the commander of the faithful." Then, with dignity that belied his vulnerable position, he added, "Young man, release my beard. Your father would never have treated me this way." Shamed by this rebuke, Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr hesitated. But the other rebels had now entered the room, their faces contorted with anger and their hands gripping weapons. One of them struck Uthman with an iron rod, while another drew his sword. Naila, witnessing the attack on her husband, threw herself between him and the assailants. "If you wish to kill him," she cried, "you must kill me first." One of the rebels struck her with his sword, severing several of her fingers as she raised her hand to protect Uthman. Her blood spattered across the room as she fell back, wounded but still trying to shield her husband. Uthman gently moved his injured wife aside, unwilling to see her harmed further on his account. "Stand back," he told her softly. "This is between me and my lord." Turning to face his attackers, Uthman made one final appeal to their conscience. "Remember Allah," he said, "and remember that I am the successor of his messenger. Would you kill a man while he recites the book of Allah?" For a moment, his words seemed to give some of the rebels pause, but others, too committed to their course of action to turn back, surged forward. One thrust his sword into Uthman's chest, while others joined in the attack. The elderly caliph raised his arms, not in defense, but in prayer, his lips moving in silent supplication as the blades fell upon him. The Quran that had been opened before him was splattered with his blood, a poignant symbol of the violation taking place, not just the killing of a man, but the rupturing of the sacred bonds that had united the Muslim community. The very scripture that Uthman had helped preserve was now stained with the blood of its guardian. For 3 days after the assassination, the body of Uthman ibn Affan remained in his house, unwashed and unburied. The rebels who had killed him maintained control of Medina, preventing the proper funeral rites that Islamic tradition demands be performed promptly after death. Nahila, Uthman's devoted wife, stayed by her husband's body despite her own injuries. Her fingers, severed in her attempt to protect him, had been hastily bandaged, but the physical pain paled in comparison to her grief. She sent messages to various companions of the Prophet, pleading for assistance in burying her husband with the dignity befitting his station. Finally, as the third day drew to a close, a small group of brave individuals responded to Naila's call. Among them were Jubair ibn Mut'im, Hakim bin Hizam, Zayd ibn Thabit, and a handful of others, barely a dozen in total. They came under cover of darkness, slipping through the streets of Medina to Uthman's house while trying to avoid the rebels' patrols. Working in haste and silence, they lifted the body of the slain caliph. There was no coffin available due to the blockade, so they carried him wrapped only in the blood-stained garments in which he had died. Another departure from Islamic tradition, which normally requires the deceased to be washed and wrapped in clean white shrouds. The small funeral procession moved through the darkened streets of Medina, with Nayla following behind carrying a lamp. At one point, they were spotted by some of the rebels, who moved to intercept them. Fearing desecration of Uthman's body, one of the companions quickly extinguished Nayla's lamp, and they continued in darkness, guided only by their knowledge of the city's layout. Their destination was not the main cemetery of Medina, where most Muslims were buried, but a Jewish graveyard called Hush Kaukab, located behind the main Muslim burial ground of al-Baqi. This choice was not made out of disrespect, but necessity. The rebels had made it clear they would not allow Uthman to be buried among the Muslims in al-Baqi. Under the pale light of stars, they dug a hasty grave. There was no time for the customary funeral prayers to be performed with proper solemnity. Jubair ibn Mut'im led a brief prayer, his voice barely above a whisper to avoid detection. Then they lowered Uthman's body into the earth, covering it quickly. The funeral of the third Caliph of Islam, a man who had been among the closest companions of the Prophet, who had married two of Muhammad's daughters, who had compiled the Quran and expanded the Islamic empire, was conducted in secrecy and fear, with fewer mourners than would attend the burial of the humblest member of the community. The assassination of Uthman ibn Affan did more than end the life of a caliph. It shattered the unity of the Muslim community and set in motion a chain of events that would permanently alter the course of Islamic history. What began as political disagreement evolved into armed conflict, theological division, and eventually the formation of distinct sects within Islam that persist to this day. The first manifestation of this division came less than a year after Uthman's death. Aisha, the Prophet's widow, along with prominent companions Talha and Zubair, raised an army in Mecca with the declared intention of seeking justice for Uthman and punishing his killers. They marched toward Basra in Iraq, gathering supporters along the way who shared their outrage at the assassination and their dissatisfaction with Ali's apparent reluctance to bring the murderers to account. Ali, now established as Caliph in Kufa, faced an impossible dilemma. Many of those who had been involved in the rebellion against Uthman were now among his supporters, making it politically difficult for him to pursue them without undermining his own base of power. Yet failing to punish them left him vulnerable to accusations of complicity or indifference to justice. When negotiations between the two factions broke down, the result was the Battle of the Camel in December 656 CE, named for the camel upon which Aisha was mounted as she directed her forces. It was the first time in Islamic history that Muslims had faced each other on a battlefield, a traumatic rupture of the brotherhood that Muhammad had so carefully nurtured. The battle ended with victory for Ali's forces. Talha and Zubair were killed, and Aisha was respectfully escorted back to Medina, where she withdrew from political life. But the deeper wound to the Muslim community could not be so easily healed. Blood had been shed between believers, creating grievances and vendettas that would fester for generations. The conflict did not end there. In Syria, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, Uthman's cousin and governor, continued to refuse allegiance to Ali, insisting that justice for Uthman must precede any recognition of a new caliph. Muawiyah had transformed the emotional response to Uthman's murder into a powerful political movement, with the blood-stained shirt of the slain caliph serving as a potent symbol around which to rally support. Ali, recognizing the threat posed by this continued defiance, marched his army towards Syria. The two forces met at Siffin, near the Euphrates River, in July 657 CE. After days of skirmishes and failed negotiations, a full-scale battle erupted. Ali's forces appeared to be gaining the upper hand when Muawiyah employed a desperate stratagem. His soldiers raised copies of the Quran on their spears, calling for the dispute to be settled by reference to the holy book rather than by bloodshed. This clever maneuver put Ali in another impossible position. To refuse this apparent appeal to Islamic principles would alienate the pious elements among his own supporters. Yet he recognized it as a tactical ploy rather than a sincere desire for reconciliation. Under pressure from within his own ranks, Ali agreed to arbitration, a decision that would prove fatally divisive. The conflict came to its tragic conclusion in January 661 CE, when Ali was assassinated by a Kharijite while praying in the mosque at Kufa. With Ali's death, the period known as the Rashidun, rightly guided caliphate, came to an end. Just 29 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, Muawiyah now moved to consolidate his position as caliph, establishing the Umayyad dynasty that would rule the Islamic world for nearly a century. Ali's elder son Hassan briefly claimed the caliphate, but soon negotiated a settlement with Muawiyah, retiring to Medina and effectively ceding political leadership. This agreement, while preventing further immediate bloodshed, did not heal the underlying divisions. The final act in this tragedy of division came 19 years later, when Ali's younger son Hussein, refusing to recognize the legitimacy of Muawiyah's son Yazid as caliph, was killed along with his small band of supporters at Karbala in Iraq. This event, commemorated by Shia Muslims to this day as Ashura, cemented the sectarian divide that had begun with the disputes over Uthman's policies and his assassination. The great division that emerged from Uthman's martyrdom thus transformed Islam from a unified community into a religion with distinct branches, each with its own understanding of history, leadership, and even some aspects of theology and practice. While all Muslims continue to share the fundamental beliefs and practices of Islam, the oneness of God, the prophethood of Muhammad, the 5 daily prayers, fasting during Ramadan, charity, and pilgrimage. Their interpretations of Islamic history and leadership created boundaries that would prove remarkably enduring. As the dust settled on the battlefields of the First Muslim Civil War, the Islamic community found itself irrevocably changed. The assassination of Uthman ibn Affan had unleashed forces that transformed a unified Ummah into distinct factions, each with its own understanding of leadership, history, and even aspects of faith. The ripples from that single act of violence in Medina would spread across continents and centuries, shaping the development of one of the world's great religions. Uthman himself emerges from historical accounts as a figure of genuine piety and sincere devotion. His early acceptance of Islam, his generous financial support for the Muslim community, his close relationship with the Prophet, and his diligent preservation of the Quran all testify to a life dedicated to faith. Even in his final moments, facing death at the hands of those who claimed to be believers, he displayed remarkable dignity and forbearance, choosing to die rather than to shed Muslim blood in his own defense. The tragedy of Uthman lies not just in his violent end, but in the contrast between his genuine contributions to Islam and the bitter divisions that followed his death. The man who had helped standardize the Quran, ensuring its preservation for all future generations, became the flashpoint for a schism that continues to this day. The companion who had been honored with marriage to 2 of the Prophet's daughters became the subject of divergent historical interpretations that would separate Muslims into distinct communities of faith. For the modern Muslim, contemplating this history can be painful. The ideal of Islamic unity, so central to the Prophet's message, seems to have shattered in the very first generation after his death. The companions whom all Muslims are taught to respect found themselves on opposite sides of a divide that would widen into sectarian identity. The blood that stained Uthman's Quran, as he recited its verses in his final moments, serves as a powerful symbol. It reminds us that the sacred text, while unified and preserved thanks in part to Uthman's efforts, has been read through the lens of historical experiences that divided the community. The same verses have comforted both Sunni and Shia Muslims through centuries of separation, speaking to a common faith that transcends the divisions of history. As we conclude our exploration of the assassination of Uthman, the plot that split the Ummah, we return to that moment in Medina when an elderly man faced death with the Quran open before him. In his dignity, his faith, and his refusal to perpetuate violence, Uthman ibn Affan embodied the highest ideals of Islam, even as events around him threatened to undermine the unity of the Muslim community. The Ummah may have split, but the core message of Islam, submission to the one God and adherence to the example of his Prophet, remained a powerful force uniting Muslims across their differences. In that enduring spiritual unity, transcending the political and theological divisions of history, perhaps we can find hope for healing the wounds that opened with the martyrdom of the third Caliph of Islam. Thank you for watching. And if you're still here, we beg you for the sake of Allah to help us grow this channel by subscribing and share this story to honor the sacrifices of our early heroes and awaken hearts. See you in our next video.